as long as President Trump is our president, that they're not going to get any help from the U.S., particularly when it comes to Ukraine or countering Russia, unless you're willing to pay for it.
Hello and welcome to The Focus. Today is Wednesday, the 25th of February, and we're speaking with returning guest Lieutenant General Ben Hodges about the Russia-Ukraine war as it enters its fifth year. We'll look at Russia's ability to sustain the fight, NATO's evolution, the latest from the battlefield, and the wider geopolitical shifts from Munich to Iran, from Greenland and beyond. Ben, welcome back to The Focus.
Well, thanks for the privilege, John.
So, as we enter year five, how sustainable is Russia's war effort now, militarily, economically, technologically, and politically?
Well, it certainly seems that they have the capacity to keep doing what they're doing for, all of this year and probably on into 2027. But I would not say it is quite so open-ended as maybe many people thought back in the beginning that Russia's so big, they've got unlimited resources and blah. I don't think that's the case. I think we're seeing evidence of that the damage to their ability to export oil and gas is having effect on their what kind of revenues they're able to get to pay for the war. The You see reports about some of the oblasts can no longer pay the bonuses that have been so effective at luring poor young men to want to join the Russian army and get sent to Ukraine. And I think you also see reports constantly of you have North Korean troops there, you have unlucky Africans and Asians that show up thinking they're going to work in some factory and they end up going to Donbass as a Russian soldier. So I think they do have issues. The part that I don't know, and even talking to Ukrainians, they or other Russia experts, what's actually going on the inside? How secure is Vladimir Putin? He seems to be quite secure. He's got a hell of a anti-coup infrastructure in place. Um, so I no longer think about, well, surely they're going to crack at some point. I mean, they probably will, but I can't predict when that might be.
So, realistically, is there any scenario where Moscow now achieves its original objective of conquering Ukraine?
No, there's no way. I mean, it would require an absolute total collapse by Ukrainians that is not going to happen. Even with the United States failing to, be that arsenal of democracy for Ukraine, Europe has the capacity and the potential, if it can summon the will, to provide what Ukraine needs. Plus, Ukraine's defense industry. Excellent article in the Financial Times yesterday about Ukrainian production is actually increasing despite their power grid being hammered. And so I just don't see it. Now, Ukraine does have to address manpower issues, um, but I don't see Russia having the ability to overwhelm or break through Ukrainian defenses. Um, Instead, you've got the Black Sea Fleet has pretty much been knocked out of the war by Ukraine. You've got Ukraine demonstrating it can hit targets 1,500, 2,000 kilometers away. That's only going to improve as they grow their capacity to produce. And the one area that is a real problem that they can't seem to do anything about yet is they can't close the sky. They can't defend the civilian population and their infrastructure against these relentless Russian air missile and drone attacks.
You know, Ben, one of the things that keeps on coming up in the back of my mind is that the Stalinist Soviet Union, for all its faults, and there were many, you still had the likes of General Zhukov and many other capable Russian generals who could fight a war of maneuver. But when you're looking at Putin's military structure, which is, I don't know, the bastard child of the Soviet Union, you don't seem to have the same sort of quality of generals in the Russian high command. How do you explain that one very brutal dictatorship like Stalinist Russia can achieve, that qualitative shift in terms of being able to conduct a war, and yet, a much softer autocracy like Putin's can't?
Hmm. That's a very good question, a fascinating question. I would love to listen to somebody who is a real expert on Russian history and understood what's going on there today much better than I do. Of course, Zhukov didn't show up on day one like that. I mean, he survived as a young officer all the civil wars and everything that happened in the 20s and 30s. And he survived the Stalin purges, and he, rose through the ranks, as did Chukov and the others, through brutal fighting. And he also, of course, benefited as the Russian or the Soviet war industry began to kick in and deliver thousands of T-34 tanks and the creation of a massive force that they were willing to use. I'm not, by the way, I'm not denigrating or somehow under trying to degrade his talent. I'm just saying that he came along at a time when now he had resources. And
Yeah.
of course, casualties were never issue for them, or they didn't a big consideration. When I think about who's a general today in the Russian army, what I have seen is a level of corruption that I missed when I was trying to understand why did the Russian army do so poorly in the first couple of years. What happened? And then as I looked at it and thought about it, I realized that first of all, very few of them had any real operational experience. I mean, it was only a small part of the army that was fighting in Syria or in Georgia or in the original invasion of Ukraine in 2014. So they didn't have all this experience that their World War II predecessors had accumulated. My sense is that their exercises are mostly demonstrations. I had more than one person tell me that the way you get promoted in the Russian army is to never make a mistake. And so if you don't want to make mistakes, you don't go out and have a real head banging exercise where that that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And uh, and so the corruption was a part that undermined the building development of a quality officer corps. And still, I think most Russia observers would say that the general staff was actually still talented and very well educated. The problem is that this was not, it seems to me that the FSB was calling most of the shots on how the invasion was going to happen. And, there's no love between the FSB and the general staff. So it's a long, incoherent answer, but I'm thinking about this. Your very good question. Why haven't these professional Russian officers done better? And I think it's a combination of factors.
Well, thank you for giving us that answer because it is an interesting question. If we're trying to look at dictatorships over a period of time, and the Stalinist dictatorship was arguably one of the world's most brutal dictatorships, and yet somehow talent managed to rise under Stalin in a way that talent doesn't seem to be rising under Putin. I think
Yeah.
that would be a very interesting historical comparative for anyone out there who's listening and is a young scholar. So go to it, I say.
I'd love to read that. I really would love to read that.
So Ben, were you at the Munich Security Conference this year?
Yes, sir, I was.
How did you read the atmospherics? I mean, did you sense anxiety, resolve, fragmentation, or some sort of new clarity about Europe's role in Ukraine?
So Munich is always a good security conference to go to. It's massive. You get to see and hear and meet and talk to so many different people, experts from across not just Europe, but primarily. And I talked. I had the chance to talk to several Ukrainian soldiers who had been invited back from their units to be there, to be available to describe what they're doing. And so the security conference was a combination of highs and lows, of frustration and elation. Talking to those Ukrainians, four women and three men, they are some serious killers. I mean, this one young woman, she couldn't have been more than 25 or so, long blonde hair. And as she described what she did as a drone operator, holy hell, no telling how many people she has dispatched. So they're serious. Then there was no bravado, but they were very serious and not a bit of oh my God, how much longer, and no quit in these soldiers. And then they also had the Olympic athlete, the one who was disqualified for his helmet that had pictures of Ukrainian soldiers who had been killed. He was there with the helmet. This was a highlight. I mean, I was so
Mm.
fired up. But then I listened to Secretary Rubio's speech, and for a very long speech with a gigantic audience, and did not even mention the Russia's war against Ukraine. He talked about how Europe and the U.S. we have this emotional, sentimental, civilizational relationship, and if you're a white nationalist Christian, that was right up
Mm.
your alley. But bad luck for
Yeah.
everybody else. And
Mm,
then, of
mm,
course, he went directly from Munich to Budapest to
mm.
meet with Orban, and then to Bratislava to meet with Fico. So that was one of the lows. His speech was the same message as Vance's last year, just said in a much more sentimentally diplomatic tone. Um,
Sort of sentimental, like you're looking at an ailing parent about to, spring off the mortal coil. Sentimental, as opposed to sentimental in a more practical, what can the US do for Europe sort of way.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And
Mm,
then on the other hand, though, while there was lots of empathy for Ukraine, and Ukraine was a topic in most of the panels and speeches, otherwise, what I never heard was like, okay, Europe, Germany, Poland, UK, Norway, everybody, it is in our interest that Ukraine is successful, and we are going to do everything necessary to make sure that Ukraine defeats Russia inside Ukraine. I didn't hear that. There was lots of, oh, we got to do this. And now at least there was a grim realization that the United States is not going to do it. I mean, I think people have finally woken from the dream that somehow President Trump was going to come back and use all the leverage he has, and finally, you know, get tired of Putin playing him along, and that he was going to do something. I think they realized that, especially after Rubio's speech, that is never going to happen, and that these so-called peace negotiations are not going to lead to anything that's good for Europe. So there's at least understanding. I just didn't get the feeling that they were all committed.
From the European perspective, though, Ben, is Europe psychologically adjusting to the possibility of reduced US leadership?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I think it's the Greenland thing.
Mm.
That was, I think, for most of them was like holy hell. Um, that maybe for individual leaders had different, points at which they came to that realization, but I would say all of them now. And then they see the tariffs and all this stuff, and I think they realize that as long as President Trump is our president, that they're not going to get any help from the U.S., particularly when it comes to Ukraine or countering Russia, unless you're willing to pay for it.
Yeah, yeah, sure. But it's not all bad news, really, because we now do see that European support for Ukraine now appears to outweigh direct US assistance. So Europe is actually showing that it can do what it should be doing and what it probably should have been doing all along. Isn't that a good sign?
Well, that's a true statement that Europe is doing more now that it should have been doing. But actually, Europe passed the United States many, many months ago in terms of
Mm,
overall support to Ukraine. This is not a new thing. So the Europeans have been providing more to Ukraine than the U.S. And for me, um, as a proud American, I have a kind of a yucky feeling about selling Patriot interceptors to European countries so that they can then give them to Ukraine. I mean,
Yeah.
I just that doesn't sound like arsenal of democracy to me. This sounds like it's a business transaction, a way to make money. But this is a manifestation of the administration's approach as laid out in the national security strategy and the national defense strategy about, it's transactions. Europe, you're on your own. We're going to focus on the Western Hemisphere and having economic benefits in the Indo-Pacific, and it's going to be all about deals
Yep.
versus values based. Now, I will say, and this is going to be a little bit inconsistent with what I've been saying the last few minutes. I don't worry that the president's going to try to leave NATO. I mean, I think he really was close to doing that, according to John Bolton back in Trump 1. I think he's come to realization it's actually to the benefit of the United States. You have more leverage as well as having a bunch of allies by being in NATO. And even Under Secretary Bridge Colby, who is no fan of Europe, said at the defense ministerials just a few days before Munich that, of course, the United States nuclear deterrent would remain in effect. So that's still going to be there. And I actually don't have any problem with the decision on the command structure that the U.S. would hand back the four-star command at Joint Force Command Naples and the four-star command at Joint Force Command Norfolk, that those would be European officers, um, but that the United States would retain the SACEUR position. That was important. And then finally, at the end of the day, the number of U.S. military personnel, Army, Navy, Air Force that are in Europe now is still what it was more than a year ago. I'm not hearing about or anticipating significant reductions of U.S. military presence in Europe.
So the key question here, Ben, is NATO weakening or is it evolving into a more genuinely European-led architecture?
I think that your second possibility is much more accurate. You know, what has always made the alliance successful, the secret sauce was cohesion. That no matter what problems were going on, no matter what arguments were happening between the nations inside the alliance, the fact was, I think the Soviets never doubted, and our allies never doubted that the U.S. would be there. Uh, the that all of us would be there. That cohesion was such an important thing. The fact that so many people ask now, oh, is U.S. Can you count on the U.S.? That's a crack in the cohesion, and if it got much worse, then that could lead to a terrible miscalculation by the Russians about the alliance willingness to do anything. But to me, um, the what's actually happening is an evolution because of that. A recognition that Europe could actually provide, it has the wherewithal, if it had the political will, to provide almost everything that the U.S. provides, except for the nuclear deterrent. And I think, if they were willing to invest, you could have air power, sea power, more satellites, all of these different things, better logistics, the things that only the U.S. can provide at scale. Of course, Europe can do that. I mean, they dwarf Russia. If you
Mm.
combine everything they have, it dwarfs Russia. Not even close,
Mm.
except for the nuclear deterrent. So I think I think this is going to be part of the evolution of the alliance.
As we're moving into a more transactional kind of international environment, we recently had an Indian Lieutenant General on our show, and we were talking about India's role in the world and all that. And he brought up the notion of a cash and carry supplier of weapons, being, a place like France, for instance, it doesn't put any caveats on how the end user is going to be using the weapons. The US, on the other hand, it always has caveats to its customer base. It says, yes, I can provide you F-35s, but under these strict conditions, IP is locked down, so you can't tinker around with the back end unless you're Israel, and all that kind of stuff. Can the US transition from being an alliance partner, which demands protection for its military IP in a more transactional cash and carry environment, or can it not make that transition? Because I've heard around the traps, and maybe you can confirm this for our audience, that President Trump is already starting to complain that the Europeans aren't buying enough American weapons now. And if that's the case, I mean, it makes sense because, of course, Europe does have its own defense industries, and it would make sense for them to buy from their own stables rather than from whatever the Americans are putting forward. But because the Americans always have, under the old alliance structures, put these caveats on what they can and can't get away with doing, or at least what the end user can and can't get away with doing, then where does that leave the alliance in that sort of situation? Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question again. I think that the some of these restrictions you're talking about, of course, are law by the Congress. There you couldn't provide certain things to organizations if they had a terrible human rights record. Okay, so there's those are some of the restrictions, but there are. I think our own procurement system takes so long, and I can remember listening to procurement officers from other countries complaining that, hey, I paid for this XYZ 3 years ago. We still haven't got it yet. So I think the current administration, for all its faults, at least they seem to be attacking this procurement problem in a different way to speed things up. And so when the heads of the industry start complaining to the president that people are no longer interested in buying whatever it is because it takes too long, there's too many restrictions, and another country is stepping up saying, "Well, I can give you almost as good without so many restrictions, and I'll get it to you on time." I mean, the South Koreans are stepping in big time in Europe. You got Poland, which is reliable a customer of U.S. as anybody. They bought a bunch of South Korean tanks because General Dynamics was taking too long to get the Abrams to them. Now they got both. So I can't tell you how many times I've had people look me in the eye and say, "Okay, I know you guys have a kill switch on the F-35."
Mhm.
There's no such thing, but people absolutely believe it. And so if they believe that, then they're going to be reluctant to buy the F-35. So there could be opportunity for other countries if the United States loses that reliability and people that want to have Patriot or whatever, um, they say, you know what, I'll settle for second best because it'll be easier.
So, okay, we've established the fact that NATO is evolving and probably doing what American administrations long past have wanted Europe to do. And I mean, we're really talking about the unipolar moment, once the Soviet Union collapsed, all the way to maybe 5 years ago, less than 5 years ago, where the Europeans were starting to scramble around for an answer. They are starting to come up with an answer. Could that answer have been done under any other administration other than the Trump administration?
I think that's too simplistic. I think you've got the biggest war in Europe since 1945 that has already killed, 1.5 million Ukrainians and Russians, uh, unbelievable amounts of damage, millions of displaced people or refugees all over Ukraine and into Russia, and excuse me, into Europe. So that was a jolt. that people just couldn't believe that Russia would actually do this, and now here they are, they've done it. And so certainly President Trump would deserve credit for demonstrating that he was serious about, we're not going to do this anymore,
Mm.
and Europeans are going to have to accept more responsibility, just like every other American president has said it, but it didn't seem to have the effect. But I think it's a combination of the style of President Trump. And of course, what the Russians are doing, the threat they represent. I hear it all the time from Germans and others, we got to get ready by 2027, 28 or whatever, and huge, significant changes in German society, for example, about defense spending. And, they no longer complain or argue about whether or not to grow the Bundeswehr. It's about
Mm.
how. How do you get there? That's the argument.
Mm.
Um, so, uh, you know, it usually takes a disaster for governments to do big things. You got to respond to a real threat. And I think the sad realization, and I say sad because as an American that knows how valuable our allies are to us, um, now you see allies talking about can they trust the United States with intelligence sharing? Um, do we really want to continue to allow the United States to use these bases that are in Europe that are so important for us? Um, do we really want to buy American equipment or capabilities? I just saw the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, was expressing some concern that if there's going to be a strike against Iran, pretty much doing it without allies. Okay, and Prime Minister Starmer said that the U.S. cannot use any air bases in UK for anything. Okay, this is what these are some of the results of the Trumpian approach.
Yes, not good, not good at all. So, Ben, on another issue that I know you feel very strongly about, and that's Russia's shadow fleet. It remains central to financing Moscow's war. We are now starting to see greater disruption of these vessels. I mean, even India is detaining some. Are we finally seeing serious economic warfare that could constrain Russia's capacity to fight?
So this is an area where even the Trump administration now is helping to getting involved with chasing down vessels that are violating sanctions, whether they're carrying Venezuelan oil or Iranian or maybe even Russian. Um, this it will be just as important to Ukraine's effort as Ukraine having long range precision strike to hit refineries, and so. Um, There are things that nations could do, especially in the Baltic Sea. Every country is a NATO country and an EU country. Legal steps they could take in accordance with the law that would allow them to stop these vessels, check for safety, insurance, environmental issues. They have the authority to do that. They just got to do it. And obviously, especially like Estonia, they're terrified. That's not fair. They are scared that how Russia will react to that. But if they're all doing it, I think this is something that could have immediate impact when they're not able to export oil and gas to China, India, or Turkey. Um, and so that would have a significant effect on Russia's ability to continue to prosecute the war.
The Trump administration's earlier rhetoric about Greenland generated significant controversy, and you flagged that earlier. Is that issue effectively over, or does Greenland remain strategically relevant given Arctic competition, Russian militarization in the high north, and Chinese interest in Arctic routes?
So that issue is still on the table, but I listened to Prime Minister Frederickson at the Munich Security Conference, and she said it's still an issue, but it's in the right place. That means inside a NATO context where they're talking about how do we improve Arctic security, which would address the president's, supposedly that was the reason he was all fired up about Greenland. Um, but that does not address his claims that this is Western Hemisphere, it should be ours, his desire for legacy, and who knows what lies beneath the ice and snow there in terms of minerals, for example. But at least I think this was a good example of Europe recognizing they can work with the administration, but also stand up to the administration. And at least it seems that the president has backed down. Now we've got this silly thing about he claims that Greenlanders are not taking care of sick people, so he's going to dispatch the U.S.
Ah,
Navy
the
ship.
hospital ship.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I
well, of
saw
course,
that.
both of them apparently are in maintenance in somewhere in Alabama, and they're not going anywhere. So this was more of an info op than anything. And of course, the Danes are having a field day. I've seen some funny things of Denmark coming to help. And of course, the Danes did help pull a U.S. sailor off of an American submarine that was had a medical emergency. They flew out and picked him up and took him to a hospital in Greenland. So uh, it's still there.
Okay, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, thank you for joining us again and for sharing your insights on the focus.
John, I love coming on your program. I always appreciate it, and you always have great questions and a good tone. So thanks for the privilege.
Thank you very much, Ben. This war has become a laboratory for 21st century power. Drones, sanctions, alliances, and energy all intertwined. How it ends will define far more than Ukraine. Now, on to questions for the audience. If Europe is now carrying more of the direct military burden in Ukraine, does that strengthen NATO or signal a long-term shift away from US leadership in Europe? 5 years after 5 years of war, do you believe Russia can outlast Western political will, or has Moscow already overextended itself? Are we witnessing a coordinated rollback of Russian and Chinese influence globally, or are these just isolated events that look strategic in hindsight? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a free way to support us. You can also subscribe to the podcast on the Ozcast Network, iTunes, and Spotify, where we'd appreciate your 5-star reviews. Do you have comments or questions about the podcast? Post them in the comments section on YouTube, and I'll do my best to respond to as many as I can. My thanks as ever to the producers of The Focus, Neil Smart and Lynn Sear. Please stay connected with us on social media. Follow me on X at Bruni Doctor, and follow The Focus on X at @thefocus_sage. And don't forget Blue Sky on thefocuspod.adl.bsky.social. From Adelaide, South Australia, you've been listening to The Focus.